Hey everyone, welcome back to Chat Cemetery. I'm your host, Deanna Chapman, and today I am joined by Drew Dietsch to talk about something that is not anthology related for once, Drew. It's a miracle.
Yeah, and something that's new. You know, it's very rare for me to get on here and do a newer release thing. We're talking about Pet Sematary Bloodlines, which is the direct to Paramount Plus streaming prequel to the...
Sure is.
Yeah, the Pet Sematary remake from a reboot, whatever term you want to use, from a couple years ago. I'd had my eye on this simply because I liked the remake. I didn't think it was as bad as a lot of people seem to think it was. I liked it. And then this got announced and I was like, prequel, I'm not interested in stuff. But then I saw the cast and got interested and was like, okay, I'll check this out. It's, but I know it had been announced and I think it sat on a shelf for like a year or something. I don't know if this was, obviously it was a post initial, quarantine pandemic movie. They already got that happen, but this is a prequel to that. I can't remember if it was 2018,
19, I think.
19, yeah. In which it takes place in the 60s in Ludlow with young, sexy Judd Crandall, which I never knew I would be okay with seeing a young, sexy Judd Crandall. The thing that I liked, because, we'll get into our personal reviews of the movie, but something that I liked as a fan of Pet Sematary, which I read for the first time last year and just absolutely, very fun. I mean, when Hurricane Ian happened and I was without power for a number of days, one of the books that I read was Pet Sematary, and the Zelda scene, maybe one of the most infamous scenes, I was reading it as the sun was going down, and since it had been a hurricane, there was no power. I wasn't going to have any light anymore. Yeah. So I was literally reading that scene while the sun's setting, because I'm like, no, I'm finally here, like this moment that everybody talks about, and reading this terrifying scene while the sun's setting.
Great timing.
Well, yeah, it was perfect timing, and just was like, yes, like the hype is real. This is like a great book, a great story. And what I liked about Pet Sematary Bloodlines was that it decided to go to the source material to adapt something that has not been in any of the other adaptations. And that's the story of Timmy Baterman, which is from the book, which is a story that Judd Crandall relays in the book about Timmy went to the war and then, we were told he came back, but he was different and mumbling. And I was like, that's such a good thing to pull that hasn't been done yet to make a story around, and shows that it's like, hey, we're not just like, we'll get to when they do kind of spin their own stuff, but it's like, hey, we do want to actually acknowledge the Stephen King source material in a way. And that's certainly, because I remember that stuff in the book being super creepy. And here it's not bad. Like, it's not as good as it could be, but as the set off and kick off to the story, I don't think it's a bad place to kick off.
Yeah, here's my thing with that. It's kind of similar to when they did the Chapelwaite show, which does not take something from Salem's Lot. Instead, it is an adaptation of the short story Jerusalem's Lot.
Right. Yeah, which is very different.
Yeah, but because of the length of that story, I feel like it's a little similar as far as like what they are pulling from and how much material they're working with. Because even though this movie clocks in at 87 minutes, it's still pulling from such a small portion of the book that I was like, okay, how is this going to work? Are they going to have enough material from just that small section of the book to create like this full movie? And I find it difficult, mostly because of how many Children of the Corn movies there have been. It's like that story is short, and there have been so many feature-length films made from that, and I'm just like, okay, how about we stop this and we try and adapt the things that maybe haven't been done yet?
Oh, sure. It would be nice, but that's, the nature of our IP-ridden world is that, these things have to get milked completely. I actually wish the movie was more just about Timmy Baterman coming back to life. Because that's, again, I'm like, that's a crux enough of a story that you can spin more characters out of like this does, because that's the most, I definitely feel, and we'll get into this in a second because there's a very clear indication of this. This movie was heavily edited.
Oh, yeah.
In post-production. There are a number of signifiers. To my point about, I wish it was more Timmy, it's very clear that they shot backstory stuff with the 3 main male characters as kids that we see in flashback. And I am convinced it's like, no, that was a scene. Like that you can see in the footage that it very much looks like that was supposed to be a real scene with hearing the kids and talking and creating some kind of bond. So there's so much footage littered throughout the movie that it's like, yeah, this was clearly heavily cut down. But the biggest indication, and this was the thing that actually set me off being like, oh no, this could be terrible, is the cold open of the movie, the pre-title sequence. Because this pre-title sequence is just a montage of images with very clunky voiceover from Judd Crandall talking, something about, like back there, just past Little God's Swamp, we built a deadfall to keep people out. And it's basically like a very quick VO. Hey, welcome to Pet Sematary. Here's the lowdown, like to get you started off. And it's so clearly, again, just Frankenstein together from different footage and images that are from the previous movie and that are later in this movie. And then there's a terrible, just awful, awful looking title drop for the title Pet Sematary Bloodlines, where every word is a different color. And there's like really, it looks so cheap. It looks like a plug-in text thing that they did.
It looks like something I would create in a video editor, not being very good at any sort of like title cards or motion graphics at the moment.
Sure. I think you would at least not have every single word have the font different colors.
Absolutely
it's like
not.
White, red, and yellow. And I'm like, this is so ugly and looks so slapdash. Like it just doesn't look like it's a finished title. But, then the movie it's like, okay, David Duchovny plays Timmy Baterman's dad. We see him burying him right in the beginning. I think that's why they put that in the beginning, that whole voiceover montage thing, is because this does, I think, assume a bit that what Pet Sematary is. If you cut that VO, it would be like, yeah, it's literally opening with burying a body and it coming to life. It's getting straight to the Pet Sematary-ness of it all.
Yeah. One thing I did want to talk about real quick, because you mentioned David Duchovny. This cast, I know you mentioned this, but it's full of familiar faces. We also have Pam Grier and 2 people who are clearly vying to be in the highest number of Stephen King adaptations that I can think of in
Yes.
Samantha Mathis and Henry Thomas, who are married to each other in this movie, which makes this even more fun because they've both been in episodes of Nightmares and Dreamscapes. And, I think Henry Thomas's count is he's been in 5 adaptations now, and Samantha Mathis has been in 4 different adaptations, which is just, a fun little thing that I've been trying to keep track of.
It feels knowing. I would not be surprised if that casting is deliberate in that sense of like, we know these actors are, attached to Stephen King properties. Mm-hmm. And it's fun to cast them because Stephen King fans who watch this will catch on to that. It doesn't hurt that you get people like Pam Grier and Henry Thomas in your movie. It's like, yeah, because they're good actors. Like Pam Grier had the line of the movie for me, as far as I'm concerned. But I don't know. This is a newer thing, so I don't want to spoil so much, considering whenever, if people watch this. But yeah, she has the line of the movie that cracked me up so hard I had to pause it. And the first time I was like, I love you, Pam Grier.
Yeah.
I actually think the movie benefits so much from its casting not across the board. There's a couple weak points, but I think the casting really does help the movie intensely, because I think like Henry Thomas's role is a great example. As written, Dan Crandall, he's fine, like, and what we learn about him and stuff, but it's we'll have to spoil some stuff, I think, just for the sake of conversation.
Yeah, of course.
But I was just imagining another actor in that role and to be like, yeah, it would be fine, but it's nothing special. But having Henry Thomas in there, he just adds to it. It's the same, David Duchovny. Again, I feel like there's more of him on the cutting room floor too.
Yeah.
Because his whole, he's the dad that brought back the dead, trying to, ignore what's happening and yada, yada, yada. So, I mean, the cast is a big, big plus. I also like as far as the younger cast is concerned, these fresher faces, I like the guy that plays Judd Crandall. I don't think he's, doing anything amazing, but I think, other than being a very good looking young man, he's good. I think I recognize him from something else, but Jackson White is his name. He's fine. He's not trying to do a John Lithgow or Fred Gwynn thing. He's just playing the part as he sees it.
Yeah.
Which I think is good. But again, the writing is pretty there. It's nothing exceptional. So it's in all honesty, you could probably recast him with an even better actor and it would feel better. But it's fine. I really like Forrest Goodluck, who plays Manny in the movie.
Okay.
He's such a unique presence, just his particular acting style and his character. In all honesty, because in the movie, he is, I don't think they ever say Micmac in terms of their Native American indigenous history, but it's pretty much assumed that they're Micmac, him and his sister. And I was like, I almost would like it if the Judd Crandall and stuff was not in the movie at all. And it was just about these two characters, these brother and sister, because this is an interesting dynamic. There's a lot more going on in the movie. And I think the movie unfortunately, it's a prequel. And as such, it does fall victim to what I have dubbed prequelization or prequelizing. And here's the thing. You can do a prequel and not feel like you're doing prequelizing. Great example is something like Better Call Saul. Better Call Saul, yes, it does things that I would call prequelizing, but it never feels like it because it's so standing on its own two legs. Whereas the big prequelizing thing that it does that is dumb is that it decides to explain the history of Ludlow, the town, and as such says that there was a founding fathers group of families that knew about the sour earth from the foundation of the town. And this group of families made a pact secretly to, be guardians of the town and this kind of thing. Thematically, that's good because Judd Crandall says it in the closing VO. It's this is trying to talk about stealing Native American land and what we did to it and the punishment that we should have for it. That's certainly present in the original story, it to a lesser degree, but then it becomes this specific prequelizing element where it's actually the story that you thought you knew, there was this whole other thing going on, and Judd Crandall is really part of a lineage of guardians type thing. He's essentially a chosen one. Because what I think prequelizing does at its core is it takes something that you're familiar with and recontextualizes it with information that was not true at the time that you experienced it. So for Judd Crandall, the image of Judd Crandall that's classic is him sitting out on his porch, smoking his cigarette, right? It's in the book, it's in all the adaptations. And this prequelizes it to be he's not just sitting out on his porch smoking a cigarette. That's his guardian post, essentially. In this movie, we see his dad sits there and does it. And when we learn about this, that's the biggest part of the movie in terms of its relationship to Pet Sematary that I dislike is we got to have an old journal that tells about the story. And then here's the list of names of the founding fathers. I'm this is bad prequelizing, but when we get to my final summation, I think I have some feelings about this movie, some secret feelings that I might suss it out. But yeah, I don't know. Is there anything in the movie, because I saw your rating on Letterboxd. Is there anything in the movie that was that egregiously bad for you?
I think this movie's biggest crime is that I just found it boring for the most part, because of all of that stuff you just mentioned that they are trying to do in order to make you understand sort of more of the history of Ludlow and
just to make it feel bigger and more important. And it's you didn't need to, you really didn't. I think the story could have worked perfectly fine with none of this founding fathers backstory.
Yeah.
And you could still get to an emotional point where Judd Crandall, because the real drive of Judd Crandall's story in this is at the beginning of the movie, he's leaving Ludlow. Him and his soon to be wife, I'm assuming, are leaving to join the Peace Corps. And his dad's all for it. He's yeah, you should go and maybe you shouldn't come back and all this kind of stuff. And then they get sidetracked. And then the ending is well, I'm staying in Ludlow because that's my way of serving the forces of good, which is what Judd seems to want to, he didn't get drafted for Vietnam, but he wanted to go. He's trying to find, his dad says like, you're a hero without a cause. And that's what this ends up being. I'm like, yeah, I think you could have done that arc and have him feel that he needs to stay here without it being, well, you need to stay here because your family made a pact, when we founded the town. It's like, no, just the events of the story could have made him decide like, no, the way that I can serve the forces of good is by staying here.
It also could have been as simple as, I just watched my dad die and I'm not going to leave my mom here by herself. Like, literally, that's all they needed as a reason for him to justify staying. And because of those events that transpired, it made sense in the end without, like you said, all of that contextualizing with the history. And for me, I think my biggest complaint about this portion of the story being told the way that it is told is that it completely contradicts everything that Judd goes on to do in the course of, the actual Pet Sematary events. Because you would think that after going through this entire experience the way that Judd does, he literally would never let anyone bury anyone or any animal in the Pet Sematary again.
Oh, of course. Well, and to that all are, because it's in the book, and I'm pretty sure they allude to this in the remake. It's not so much in the more popular 80s version, is the idea that like whatever in the book they I think specifically give it the name Wendigo, but just the idea of like whatever this evil spirit is, it has a pull on people. And in the book it said, like, because there's a moment in the book when he's taking the dad out. And in the book, there's a moment where Judd turns and looks at him and he says, and for the briefest like moment, he's like, his eyes were totally different in the sense of like, this thing has possessed him to do this. Like it's able to kind of, grab onto people. And I'll say like, that's one thing that while it's not a negative, just as a fan of the source material and this idea, I wish that this movie had kind of, I don't need it to be called the Wendigo, but I'm like, yeah, I like the idea that this isn't just, you put people on the ground and they come back and they're just bad. It's like, no, they're possessed of a very particular evil spirit.
And I think the book does a great job of fleshing that out. But the way that they chose to tell the story in this movie in particular, I feel like that did not come across nearly as well. So then it's just kind of like, okay. There's a couple moments that I like when Judd and his dad, Dan, are in the Pet Sematary, and this is when he's telling him, he's like, we've been fighting for this thing for generations and stuff. And then Judd starts hearing voices whispering, and his dad says like, yeah, that's it. Like, you're hearing it, aren't you? And he's like, it tries to get in your head and mess with you. But that's why it likes the dead, because it's so much easier to take control of them than the living. And so it's like, yeah, there's like little stuff like that I like. The vision that Manny has when we first see him, where he sees like all the bleeding sunflowers. I'm like, that's a very like Stephen King image, like a portent that he would have. I'll introduce I don't know if it's so much a theory, but just what this movie actually feels like to me. It doesn't actually feel like a movie to me. What it feels like is a backdoor pilot for a Pet Sematary show. One, for the production value that it's at. This entire setup, it feels like the pilot of a show where it's like, well, guess what? Ludlow had a founding fathers thing. And, and the ending of this with Judd sitting on his porch in his, position, telling people, stay the fuck out of Ludlow. I'm like, this just feels like the kickoff to the young Judd Crandall adventures. And like, here's all the people he had to deal with, with the pet, with the evil burial ground. And this movie feels like a TV show. I mean, one, production wise, it just looks like a TV show. But two, because of that, it's like, yeah, it sets up all these characters. It feels like a setup for a continuing thing instead of just being a Pet Sematary like Judd Crandall origin story. So I don't know. I can't. My theory was like, maybe they were trying to get like a Pet Sematary show off the ground. And they were like, well, we'll make a feature. And if it, does well, maybe we can spin that into an actual series. That's my total conspiracy theory. But just the way this comes across, even, it's like,
yeah, it tells a complete story, but it really does already feel like, wow, it feels like they just want to have like the adventures of sexy Judd Crandall and Ludlow, like stopping people for, it's just like, guys, I keep telling you, stop using the Pet Sematary. And then, just has to stop a problem every week or something.
Yeah.
But I think when you talk about the movie being boring, my issues with it in that regard are because it's like, yeah, because it just feels kind of like TV show plotting, and instead of like, it doesn't have the same propulsion as a movie. It really feels like a two-parter or something of a show, like the first episodes of a show, which, maybe some people would like, but because I definitely see like, I see, you gave it 2.5 stars on Letterboxd, and I feel like that's probably I don't do half stars.
Right.
So I jumped back and forth between 2 or 3 stars because I was like, I don't think it's like terrible, but it's fine. And I, liked most of the cast and stuff. I just wish production wise it looked better, because I think this is the first feature for this director. If I remember correctly when I looked it up.
I think so.
And it's like, there's some good like framed shots. Like there's a shot of Donna, who is Manny's sister, and she's skulking around her house because she thinks something spooky's going on. And we see Timmy like in a doorway coming in out of her field of vision, or he's like in the reflection of a mirror that she can't see. And I'm like, hey, that's a nice, well-constructed shot that doesn't just look like everything else. And so it's like, yeah, that's okay. But then also the editing of the movie feels so clear. Like I would say more so even than the prequelizing. I think the editing of the movie is my biggest complaint, because it feels like, so much of it feels like it was cut out or cut down.
Yeah.
The very first one of the first sequence we have when Timmy pops out of the grave is he grabs a dog, his dog, and we cut away, and I'm like, oh, I wonder, was there more to that death that they cut down? It does feel like there's a bigger, chunkier version of this movie, and significantly so. Like, I don't think this is a matter of like, they cut like 10 minutes. I'm like, no, I feel like they cut like 20 minutes, like from this movie.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a longer cut. I don't know how interested I would be in watching it necessarily, but I will give it some credit. Like you said, the cast did well with what they were given to work with. I do think there were some good gore effects. Like, when you started talking about the opening, and I was like, I think I already wiped that from my memory. And then it started coming back to me as you were talking about it. And I was like, oh yeah, the dude just like eating the intestines and stuff. Like, that's the one image that kind of stayed with me, Well,
like when they do the flashback to like the actual founding fathers, that's probably the part where I'm like, oh, like, cut this. I don't need to see this. This is not necessary. But yeah, you do get that image of the guy Ludlow, like eating the corpses, and early on, Timmy in the basement, as he's muttering to himself, he's peeling off the skin of his fingerprints, which is a good image of, it's like, ooh, that's like gross, but also thematically, it's like, okay, that symbolizes loss of identity, like, ripping off your fingerprints. It's like, okay, he's not Timmy anymore. Like, we know that because we know how Pet Sematary works, but visually that says like, I am losing the person I am. And it's like, and it's also gross because like when Donna gets killed and she comes back, and I think Judd's wife's name is Norma, because she's the most nothing character. I think she's, and it's not the actress's fault or anything, but I think that's just the weakest character in a huge.
Yeah.
I understand why she's there, because she's a character we've never actually seen in any other adaptation or even in the source material. She's already dead by the time, the story kicks off. One, I'm like, I don't think there was a woman or a girl that looked like that in the 1960s. She just looks like a social media influencer face, like in makeup. Like, I'm like, you don't look like somebody who was alive in 1968 or whatever this takes place. But also just her character is immediately, She just gets sidelined for a big thing in the movie when she gets attacked by the dog, and then Donna comes and sees her. And I like when she's like washing Donna's feet and the skin of her feet come off, and it's like, that's cool.
Yeah.
But then the word, I would say the worst, but just like the ultimate insult for the Norma character is that she gets damseled, but she rescues herself, and as such, her point in the plot like really meant nothing other than to, I guess, extra juice Judd to want to defeat evil, because he had to go into a tunnel to try and find her, and he didn't even need to find her. She saved herself, which I'm like, I wonder if that was like originally he saved her, but then they went like, it's damseling, that you can't do that anymore. And so they reshot it to where she saves herself. So I'm like, so what's the point? Like we just keep cutting back to her in a mud bath. Like, and then she got out of it. That was that whole storyline.
I was so confused by the whole purpose of that. I was like, well, what is going on? There was also a moment earlier in the movie where Timmy confronts Marjorie, and
oh, that's Pam Grier's character?
And he makes some passing comment about like walking the same route that her dad walked every day and how he's dead.
Yeah,
I was kind of like, these are the things I wanted more of out of this movie. Like, give us a little more of the other people in the town and the history that way, the history through the people now.
The revenants, well, because that's one of my favorite creepy ideas to the Pet Sematary idea, like concept, is that these things come back and they have all the appearance of your loved one, but they're not. Like, they are an evil spirit. Like, and as such, they come back. When they come back, this evil spirit is able to tap into wells of knowledge and secrets and stuff. And that whole thing where he's like, that's what your dad said, before he hung himself. And every day you wonder if this is going to be the day you do it too. And then when we cut back and she's, calling the guy and saying like, hey, this is, how it starts. We see her reading her dad's suicide note. And it's like, yeah, like that kind of stuff, the idea that these things come back and they have an attachment to knowledge that we would never be able to, that would not be out there otherwise, and things about, the other side and death. It's like, yeah, that's what's so scary about that premise. It's not as simple as, hey, what if you wanted to bring your loved one back from the dead, but they came back and they were evil? It's like, oh, that sucks. The scary thing is the idea of like, no, what if in your pursuit to defeat death, you actually ended up doing something worse to your loved ones? Like you've done something to where they are not them anymore. They're a mockery of them. I wish there was more of David Duchovny, Bill Baderman's character, because I love the scene where he comes home and he's just like, hey, Timmy, is that you? I didn't hear you come in.
Yeah.
He's just like acting, and Timmy's in the fridge eating guts. And
he asks if it's the dog, right?
Yeah. And he's like, nope. And it's that moment where he breaks down, because then the next thing is we see like he's sitting in Timmy's old childhood room. He's got a noose on the desk and he's crying. And I like later when he's faced with Timmy that they have quick shots of him, playing catch with his son and stuff. I'm like, I'm telling you, there was more of that in the movie, like that they cut out.
Yeah, it was just one of those things for me where I was like, there are pieces here that really could have been something if they dug deeper into those certain things. But overall, I was just like, this didn't really add anything that we didn't know aside from, the whole founding families thing. And I was just like, that's fine.
That's the prequelization problem for me, is that if it feels like they do something and that something is in an effort to add on to pre-existing lore, canon, whatever, but if you take that away and it feels completely insubstantial, that's prequelizing to me.
Yeah.
It's like you can take away essentially all of the founding fathers stuff in here, and it's like, yeah, that doesn't really affect not just the later actual Pet Sematary, but it really doesn't affect this story. Like the only thing it does directly is it gives another impetus to Judd of like, well, it's part of my duty to serve as, protector here because of my family connection. And it's like, okay, but you can, again, you make that journey your own without that element. It's like, you just, know that this is evil and you need to serve the side of good, and that's it.
And we know he doesn't do a very good job of it later on.
Yeah, unfortunately. I don't think it's like some big disgraceful thing to the Pet Sematary name. Again, I feel like part of the problem is that it's a movie. If this had been like the first 2 episodes of a Pet Sematary show that promised, 10 more episodes of stuff and like could build on it, I actually think if people saw it, they would be a little less detracting of it, because it'd be like, oh, okay, but this is what we expect from certain genre television and IP television, and let's see where this is going. But as a movie, it's just kind of like, it's a nice little diversion with a good little cast and some. I wish my only big problem on that end of the spectrum is that I wish the budget was a little higher.
Yeah,
because there are times when it's like, man, this just looks like and this is just a personal problem for me as far as cinematography goes. It's like, yeah, just so much of this just looks like car commercials, and like there just doesn't seem to be a unique look or vision or anything. It just looks like this could be shot by anybody, which is why, like, when there was interesting framing or something like that, I took note of it. Or just interesting images, like the, I can't remember if it's Judd or I think it's Manny. Manny comes to like Donna's house, and before he goes in, he sees like a sunflower with a smiley face in it that's all like rotted and stuff. It's like, hey, that's like an image. That's like something unique. And yeah, I think the cast does so much heavy lifting like in this to the movie's benefit. Because it's like, oh, Henry Thomas and David Duchovny get to, spar off verbally together in a scene. I'm going to love that. Like, it's like, that's great. They're not given like the greatest things to do, but it's still, it still works and it's still fine. But as far as like, I can't imagine that there will be anything more done with this particular iteration of Pet Sematary. I feel like this is probably the end of the line for it.
Yeah. I can't imagine having 8 to 10 more episodes of this had it been a pilot.
Well, I think if you did this specific story, which really this is the thing. This story should be Timmy Baterman's back from the dead. Like, that should be the story. But something that the remake kind of introduced as a concept, which was unique and interesting for it, but then gets carried to this, which is like a very different idea when you stretch it out, is the idea that the Revenants make other Revenants for themselves. Like that was very big in the 2019 one. And here, that's like Timmy goes and kills Donna and then, takes her and buries her and she becomes a Revenant. And it becomes more of a like zombie army story, like at times where it's like, oh, they're, these things aren't here just to be evil. They're now trying to actually make as many Revenants as they possibly can, which is not what the original story is or other adaptations. And that's this here too. It should just be like Timmy Baterman he's not back from the dead. Timmy Baterman's back from Vietnam. Oh, good. Let's go see Timmy. And then Timmy's acting really weird. And, behind the scenes, we'll see that it's like, okay, he's killing people off. Doesn't have to be because they're the founding father families or whatever. It's just because he's an evil Revenant spirit. I think you could do a season of TV that would do that and would still do all of the founding fathers, Ludlow history stuff. Cause that's like, I don't know, like all that stuff just feels very much like it came out of like a Supernatural episode for me, which also helped it make it feel like a TV episode. Because one of my favorite lazy writing things is when all that goes down is they go to the town church apropos of nothing, essentially, because Judge just like, the church that has all the old town records. And I'm like, okay, I don't know what the spur of that idea was, but alrighty. And they go to the church and there's just a priest who's drunk and is just like, yeah, they gave me all this goddamn stuff or whatever. And I'm like, who's this guy? What's his story? Because like, this is why did you just they meet him? He wakes up and like breaks a wine bottle and just like, oh, what do you boys want? And I'm like, who's this clown? Like, what's going on here?
There are some characters in this town that we don't get to fully explore, which is a bit of a downside. But I think for me, it's really just one of those put it on while you're doing something else movies. I think I was doing something else here and there, which is probably why I almost forgot entirely about the opening. But I got bored fairly quickly, like once I realized, oh, they're not really going to give us anything new here. So that was kind of the biggest downside for me, was that it was just boring. But overall, it's a fairly inoffensive prequel. It's not like,
well, I'm sure again I'm sure people will take offense, like they ruined Pet Sematary with us. I don't feel that way. I'm like, that doesn't matter. Like, this is stupid stuff that can be, that you'll disregard anyways. But no, I think it's also the thing is, it's this is like a really backhanded compliment, is like it's negligibly watchable, where it's like you don't have to see it and it won't affect anything. you can watch it and maybe you'll like it even more than Deanna and I, did. But at the end, it's like, yeah, but this is a negligible experience where it's like at the end, you can be like, yeah, that was good, but it doesn't amount to anything further beyond itself.
Yeah, it was just more of what we were already familiar with, and that's fine.
Yeah, at a lower budget with, I think the biggest thing, and which also contributes to its TV show feeling, is that it's just a big ensemble of characters, which we don't have in Pet Sematary stories. Like the Pet Sematary stories that we've gotten are very small groups of characters. Usually it's a family and their next door neighbor. Like that's it. Like as far as substantial characters in these stories, it's Judd and his family. It's Norma. It's Timmy and his father. It's Manny and Donna. It's the founding fathers and their descendants. It's like, yeah, this is like a lot of moving parts for this IP. Yeah. And as such, again, it feels like it's trying to set things up for a bigger thing, which makes it feel like, it feels like set up for a TV show, which makes it less of a movie experience for me. And then, of course, at the end, they also have to bring back the horrible multicolored title card at the end. And I'm just like, oh, right. This was the movie I was watching. I don't know if I can like fully. This is what I would say. If you've seen every Pet Sematary adaptation movie sequel thing, you may as well watch this one. Like that's kind of having only read the book for the first time last year, I kind of came at it from the angle. I was like, well, I've seen every Pet Sematary movie and, I like the idea and the property and the characters and stuff like that. That's kind of like the only person I can say I would directly recommend this to. Because the other thing I was trying to think about was like, and I think about this with so many of these like reboot projects and all this kind of stuff, is like, I'm trying to put myself in the head of somebody that this is their first Pet Sematary thing. Like this is the first thing they ever see of Pet Sematary.
Yeah.
And less so on a quality side, I just started to like watch and it's like, no, I don't think that would work because there does feel like, even though this will explain it to you, it feels like it assumes you've seen Pet Sematary or know the Pet Sematary concept.
Yeah.
And so I can't imagine going into this first time blind and having a super positive experience, because I do think you would, in addition to, because the movie is certainly has flaws that we brought up, but just in general, be like, yeah, I feel like you'd feel kind of outsider, because one thing that you'll absolutely be like, what is this about? Are the truck jump scares they put in this that have like they never, I was waiting for somebody just to have the line like, yeah, that road, it's always so busy and like just a throwaway line. They don't even have that. It's just like no, Pet Sematary. So there's trucks jump scares, like because this road is here.
And there's more than one, which seems excessive.
Yeah, no, it opens and closes the movie. And I think there's another one in the middle of the movie too. So it's like, they never mention, it's just like, no, but that's a Pet Sematary thing, is the truck jump scare.
And yet Judd can just park his car in the street.
Sure. Yeah. Nobody seemed to be like, hey, again, I was just waiting for a throwaway, nodding line of like, that street and those trucks or something, and they never did, which was another thing. I'm like, I think you need to know what Pet Sematary is to really understand what some of this is trying to do. But because it's very clearly, especially since it went direct to streaming, it's clearly trying to aim for a younger audience. Even the main characters in this really are the youngest main characters that we've had in a Pet Sematary story since Pet Sematary 2, as far as perspective characters. And so it's like, yeah, this is trying to be modern genre TV type stuff to get that. But I can't imagine anybody watching this and it's their first thing and being like, wow, this is the thing that gets them into Pet Sematary. And be like, I don't think that's going to happen. So, yeah, it will be forgotten. I can tell you that right now.
Probably by me as well.
Well, it was forgotten by you in certain chunks, but just in general, it will fade away in terms of its franchise placement or whatever. But I think it's a fine enough like Pet Sematary thing, especially because at this point it's like, well, we've gotten 2 adaptations of the book and then a sequel.
Yeah.
That's its own total thing. And I'm like, look, I think the I think the Pet Sematary concept has plenty of things you can do with it.
Oh, yeah.
That's why I wanted to watch this, was I was like, well, I don't want to dismiss this outright just because it's a prequel, because I like the Pet Sematary idea, and there's still, and that's why I was so enthused by like, oh, they're doing the kid who comes back from Vietnam story. That's never been in anything. That's great. Like, that's absolutely something to glom onto. One last criticism I will say is that, and obviously this is going to be subjective, but I do wish the movie was creepier, because it's got some creepy stuff in it that...
It wasn't very scary, yeah.
Yeah, like I think probably the two creepiest moments, again, what the movie should have been about, is when Timmy has interactions with people. The one being that you said, the male woman played by Pam Grier, Marjorie, when he says like, yeah, I'm starting to think that home is just another box, like a coffin. Isn't that what your dad said? It's like, that's great. Like, that's a spooky thing. And then when he shows up at that party and asks to dance with Donna, and she's like, there's no music, and you hear his bones creaking, and he says things like, Manny and Donna will never get out, you're gonna die here, stuff. It's like, yeah, this, like, this is what is creepy about the Pet Sematary Revenant idea, is them coming back and messing with you, and scaring you with the stuff that they say and they know. Because she talks earlier about like having dreams, and he's like, what are those things you see in your dreams, Donna? It's like, that's creepy. Like somebody knowing what you're dreaming. So I wish there was more of that. I wish the focus was even more on Timmy and him coming back. As such, Timmy is the inciting thing and kicks things off, but he's really a vehicle to then get into the prequelizing elements of, well, there were founding fathers and you're part of the founding families. And I'm like, oh, so that's what this really was. If I would nix all of that and again just make it about, I wanted to see that scene of Judd, Timmy, and Manny as kids in their treehouse sneaking beers, because I'm like, yeah, I wanted, like, that's what the story should be. It should be these three characters are the central characters. It's about their dynamic. There should be different dynamics between Judd and Manny, Manny and Timmy, Timmy and Judd, like. But if that was there, it got very edited out. I would say probably that's the biggest problem for the movie in terms of an emotional core, is the moments where Judd and Manny are having friendship and stuff. I think the actors are doing a good job, but the writing or the stuff that they allow us to see in the finished movie, I don't think sells that friendship between the three of them as strong as it could be.
Yeah, it didn't feel as natural as I think you typically want something like that to feel. But I will give this movie credit before we end things here. I do like some of the set pieces. They felt like they kind of nailed the look of Ludlow, even though like maybe in camera things didn't look fantastic all the time. Just the way that the hospital was laid out, the way that... Yeah,
the sign, like the town sign. Like the town sign has character, where somebody's drawn a smiley face in the O in Ludlow. And
same with like how the church looked when they walked up, and just things like that.
Or that they go to like the hockey rink to watch tryouts. I will say, like, yeah, like Ludlow feels like a legit town in the movie. More so maybe than in any of the other adaptations. Like, it's like, no, this feels like the story is about the town and the community. So as such, it needs to feel that. And I would agree with that. One little thing, and I don't think anybody will even like care about this, but it's just me. During the ending climax, Judd is going into the swamp to fight Timmy, and they have a shot underwater of him, walking. And this is, I mean, I have my name attached to a zero budget horror movie, so I understand the limitations of budget and things you have to do. But they show this shot of his feet underwater, and it is just a tank. Like, they didn't even like dress the floor of the tank with like dirt or mud or anything. It's just his feet in a water tank, like walking on the floor of a water tank. And I'm like, throw some leaves in the water or something. Like, do it's
give it
just
texture.
Yeah, it's just that. I mean, it's egregious that he's standing on concrete basically in the
dirt, literally anything. Dirt's cheap.
Yeah, so I'm like, I'm just like, just do anything. It's like, but again, no, people won't even like register that at all. But for me, it was one of these moments like, guys, come on. Like, I know all of your budget probably went to hiring people like David Duchovny and Henry Thomas and Pam Grier. Like, I'm sure that you put a sizable enough chunk to guarantee them in the movie to give them that, cult name appeal. But he's standing on concrete. Yeah. Is this a concrete swamp? Like, what is going on?
Well, aside from that set piece is what I mean.
Yes. No. But I would agree. Like, I like the
just like the look of the town.
Well, and just like the entire ending at the Baderman's farm, I think is really good. And I don't know if this was where it was going. And again, this could have been cut out. The reveal that Timmy has dug tunnels underground. And I was like, oh, is he digging to the Micmac ground?
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, oh my God, that's another one of those, like, I thought it up in my own head, and then that's not like that was going to happen. But it was like, wow, going under the Micmac ground, that would be like, what's there? Let's see some like weird Micmac totems or something like that, or weird other,
right. sigils
and symbols, some weird space. But that was my own head. But I do like that. It's like, oh, he's digging tunnels underground because you could make up any reason. He's dead and he feels more comfortable under the dirt, kind of thing. But I liked that. And I really liked David Duchovny in this, the little bit that he gets. And yeah, again, it's fine. I think it's actually a really, really okay movie. And there are certain things about it that I liked enough to like it in that regard. But it is ultimately disposable and unfortunately kind of crafted to be as such. So yeah, it won't have staying power. It's not terrible. And most of the reactions that I see to this are saying like, this is terrible. I'm like, no, it's just fine.
I've seen mostly on my end a lot of like 2.5, 3 stars, which it's fine. It's one of those Stephen King adaptations where I did not have any expectations.
It's not even an adaptation at this point, It's really spinning off of it. It's spinning off of an adaptation, like
it's derivative, yeah.
And that's okay. Like again, like I don't want to dismiss those things outright, but as it stands, it does. Again, I just can't. I don't know if that Pet Sematary movie made enough money for Paramount to go like, hey, like we can capitalize on this, but we're not going to do another theatrical movie. Let's do something, because the studio this is Paramount Players, which I'm sure now is pretty much exclusively streaming, but that's also like their direct to video outlet. And so it's like, I don't know if they were just like, hey, Pet Sematary, let's, make a thing because we have the rights. And, I don't know. Like at this point, I don't know what they would want to do with Pet Sematary going forward after this, if anything. I'm sure if it does well enough on streaming with numbers, there will be talks about some kind of series or another movie or something like that.
Or if they're trying to keep the rights to it, you never know.
Well, yeah. Well, I'm sure they had the rights long enough in terms of in between now. But yes, that does help them when it comes to rights. It's like, hey, we are developing things and getting them out. So yeah, I mean, I can only recommend this to people who really care about Pet Sematary. Like, I can't even really recommend this to people who care about Stephen King stuff, because it's like, no, this is like so detached from that at this point. Like, it really, even though it's spinning off of material that is based off of his material, this is so, branched off from that tree that it's like, if it's like, well, if I like all Stephen King stuff, should I check it out? It's like, nah, probably not. But if you like Pet Sematary, and if you liked the Pet Sematary remake, I would say give this a look. Otherwise, yeah, it's probably not going to be on anybody's radar and not worth the surprisingly short runtime. I'm surprised the movie's as short as it is, but yeah, not a bad movie, I think, but nothing to truly write home about, which, are often the worst movies. Like, it's like you almost wish it was worse because then it would be more memorable and more worth highlighting, or you wish it was better for the same reasons. Instead, it's kind of perfectly in the middle there. With enough stuff that I liked that I gave it a heart on Letterboxd, but your mileage is going to vary for this one. But, if you want a Pet Sematary TV show, I'd say check this out. Yeah,
I would say if you don't have anything else that is a priority to watch first, just put this on one night.
If you like, if this Jackson, what's his name? Jackson Scott something. If you want to see him shirtless and sweaty a lot, like, this is a great movie. Like, he is a very nice looking young man. And if you want to see, like even Manny, when he like gets in his, he's like, why are you all sexy?
That I think for me was the funniest line of the movie. And I know you mentioned the Pam Grier line, but I think that one just really got me.
It's, I mean, I love that actor, Forrest Gump. He's just he just has such a unique delivery and persona, and that is what, like, he's really good at the funny stuff for that. He's very deadpan, like, why are you sexy? So yeah, it's got some bright spots. It's got a good cast. I would say if I was going to highlight one thing that is the best about the movie, it's the cast and the cast, the work they're doing. It's not just like, hey, I like Henry Thomas and he's in this. It's like, no, Henry Thomas is doing a good job. Pam Grier is doing a good job. You know, the David Duchovny is doing a good job. So if you like those people, that might be a reason to check this out. But otherwise, yeah, this is a pretty under the radar type flick for this type of stuff. But still, worth your time if you have any kind of vested interest or just a deep love of Pet Sematary. It's like, check this out. You're not going to love it, but you might find some stuff that you like. Yeah.
Well, that wraps up our Pet Sematary Bloodlines discussion. Drew, thank you for coming on for a non-anthology episode.
Yeah, it's a rarity, but I'm always happy to this worked out perfectly in terms of getting to cover it. And one of these days I'm going to come on here and we're going to talk about something like really, really, really good. But for the most part, I'm still available for the Pet Sematary Bloodlines and the Children of the Corn 2020s of the world. Just because you mentioned Children of the Corn earlier, go listen to the Chat Cemetery episode we did on Children of the Corn. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I would be like, yeah, if you were going to watch one, watch Children of the Corn, because it's so bad. It's so terrible that it's more worth your time than this, where this is actually more functional and more okay, but it's less interesting to watch than the bonkers badness of Children of the Corn 2020. So, if that's where you lean, go in that direction.
I had already tried to wipe that Children of the Corn from my memory too, apparently.
I'll never forget Subsidies. Subsidies is with me forever.
Goodness.
It's one of my favorite things. So, but yes, no, I'm always happy to be on here and chatting some appropriately chatting some Pet Sematary with you, Deanna.
Appreciate it, Drew, and thank you all for listening.